Pretty much every morning you wake up and open your phone and think to yourself, I wonder if this roiling fight on the right is still ongoing, the fight over who's a Nazi and who's Nazi adjacent and who should be platformed and who should be deplatformed. That fight, the one that has mesmerized ex-users across the world. What is that fight actually about and how long will it continue? Well, the first thing to know about it is that it didn't start 3 weeks ago with Nick Fuentes' appearance on a podcast. No, this has been a fight taking place mostly behind the scenes since January. And that tells you a lot about what it's actually about. So here's how it began. Donald Trump inaugurated January 22nd of this year. Almost immediately after, he is visited at the White House by the first head of state to come to Washington, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And the visit is not simply a congratulatory visit. They're not actually allies in any sense. Remember that Benjamin Netanyahu was one of the very first to congratulate Joe Biden after the 2020 election. So there's probably not a lot of warmth there, just guessing. No, there was a purpose to the visit and the subsequent visits by the Prime Minister of Israel to Washington. And that was to get American support for a regime change war in Iran to overthrow and replace the government of Iran, which the nation of Israel sees as its primary regional threat. Iran has all kinds of very dangerous conventional weapons. The United States spends a lot protecting Israel from those missiles. And Israel is also concerned that at some point, Iran will either make or buy a nuclear weapon, leaving Israel no longer the only nuclear-armed nation in the region. So that's what it's actually about. And to be honest, you can see from Israel's point of view, if you're trying to identify long-term serious threats to you, Iran would be at or near the top of the list, especially since Israel has taken out almost all the other threats. So it's just Iran. The question is it in America's interest to participate in that war? And make no mistake, Israel wouldn't last 3 days in a war by itself against Iran. In fact, probably not even 24 hours. Israel's population centers would be taken out by Iran's conventional weapons. And at that point, the Israeli government could either nuke Iran, starting a chain reaction that, you can't really predict once it begins, or allow hundreds of thousands of its own citizens, certainly tens of thousands, to be killed. So Israel could not do it alone, and no honest person suggests or would suggest that it could. It needs the United States. So the question from the American perspective is it good for America to get involved in yet another Israel-inspired regime change war in the Middle East? There have been quite a few, most notably Iraq. Is that a good idea? And so that debate began, and it mostly began behind the scenes. It didn't sort of peek out into public view very often, but when it did, the people who wanted the regime change war against Iran, with almost zero exceptions, almost never admitted what they actually wanted, and they certainly never acknowledged what the debate was actually about. It was about one nation's interest versus another nation's interest. Do those interests convene? Are they the same thing, or are they at odds with each other? I can see what would be a good idea for Israel to want this. Is it a good idea for us? That's the debate that never took place. And it didn't take place because almost from the beginning, the people who wanted regime change war with Iran made the debate instead about, why do you hate the Jews? You're a Nazi. And of course, that was never what the debate was about, because Israel, the nation of Israel, the one with the parliament, the Knesset, and the military, the IDF, and lots of people and tech firms, and is not, by the way, exclusively Jewish, and it isn't actually the same as all Jews in the world at all. And in fact, there are a lot of Jews around the world who have mixed feelings about Israel or certainly don't want a regime change war in Iran. But the people who do want that in the United States, Israel's proxies in the United States, its defenders, its professional defenders in the U.S., immediately made the debate about the Jews. It wasn't the anti-Semites who did that, actually. It was the defenders of Israel in the United States, not all of whom are Jewish, to be clear. They're the ones who made the debate from the first day, why do you hate the Jews? And so for those who were hesitant to get into another regime change war, it's intimidating because you're happy to have a debate any time of day about what's in the interest of the United States, when should we project military force, what can we learn from the last 25 years, et cetera, and you'd probably win that debate because there's no evidence that any regime change war we've engaged in the past couple of generations has helped us. Zero evidence. And everyone kind of knows that, including the President of the United States. But if you make it a debate about why do you hate the Jews, then most people are going to opt out because they don't want to deal with it. Most of them don't hate the Jews, you hope. no evidence that they do, but nobody wants to be tarred as a bigot. And so very few people pushed back, very few. In fact, as far as I know, only 2 people, me and Charlie Kirk, actually went and spoke directly to the president to make the case that no, you shouldn't get involved in this war because its aim is not actually to deny Iran a nuclear weapon. That may be a virtuous goal, but that's not really what this is about. What this is about is luring the United States into yet another regime change war. And if you do that, it's bad for everybody, including you. That's the case that we made. Charlie went to the White House to make that case, and God bless him for doing that. And he was hated for doing that. Hated for doing that. But he did it. Very few other people did. In fact, as far as I know, none. So, of course, in June, the debate ended, and the United States did commit military force to Iran. It bombed Iran and spent billions to protect Israel once again from the inevitable, the predictable conventional response from Iran, et cetera, et cetera. And in the end, thank God, we did not get lured into a regime change war. But the bitterness lingered, and the total unwillingness of the people pushing for that war to state their aims, to be honest about what they wanted, and to defend what they wanted, remained. They understood from the very first day that they could not win that debate. They didn't want that debate. They wanted another debate where they felt they could win or at least cow their opponents into total silence, and that debate was about, quote, the Jews, anti-Semitism. And again, this is a country that hasn't had a lot of anti-Semitism. Decent people are not anti-Semitic. Christians understand that anti-Semitic behavior or thoughts, attitudes are unchristian because Christians are universalist in their thinking. Every person has the capacity to come to God through Jesus. Every person, no matter how they were born. And so, of course, no sincere Christian could be an anti-Semite, and no sincere Christian would ever defend anti-Semitism. In fact, he would call it out as he would racism or any form of discrimination on the basis of blood. He would call it out immediately. So this was never about anti-Semitism, despite the fact there, of course, are anti-Semites and all kinds of other people in this country. There are 350 million of them. But this debate was not about the Jews or anti-Semitism. It was about when to use military force and to what extent should you follow the lead of a much smaller nation as you think about your own nation. And for a lot of people, this was enormously frustrating since Donald Trump was elected for the second time last November on a platform that explicitly promised, and this is why he was elected, to help the United States, which is in tough shape and getting worse. And everybody knows that. And all of a sudden, this foreign prime minister shows up and starts hijacking the attention and the money of our country to his ends. And that could be any prime minister, by the way. It happens to have been Benjamin Netanyahu. But conceptually, that's outrageous, and people were justly upset about it. Absolutely, they were upset about it. So where will this go? Well, of course, the people who think the U.S. government should act always and everywhere on behalf of its own citizens, the America First people, those people are going to win the debate. In fact, there's never actually been a real debate. But when people's mind fog clears and they can think about what just happened, they'll understand that this was never about the Jews or anti-Semitism, much less Hitler, who's been dead for 80 years as of April. No, it was about, should the United States act in its own interests or should it subvert its own interests on behalf of a foreign power with a very effective lobby in Washington? That's exactly what the debate is. And the answer is, of course, no. So the America First people, or the people who just think the government should serve its own citizens, which, let me remind you, is the only legitimate rationale for representative government. In other words, if the government is not representing its own citizens, if it doesn't care about its own citizens, it's not only off track, it's illegitimate. It has no basis to govern because it's a representative democracy. So you are morally bound, you're legally bound to represent your own people. That's the only purpose of having a government in our country, is to represent our people. And if you're not doing that, you're not legitimate. So they will win. And in a year or two, we're going to look back on what we've been watching for the last month or last 8 months, and we're going to realize this is exactly like BLM or Me Too. You know, at the core, there may have been a point, but basically, it's buffoonery. It is an effort to divert your attention from the real crisis. And we're going to wonder, wait a second, since when did the institutional right, conservatives, people who run the think tanks and the dumb little magazines nobody reads and the people who blow Viet on Fox News, since when did those people become completely committed to identity politics and censorship? Because they are committed to identity politics. That's what this is. It's identity politics. Of course. It's group over nation. Of course. It's another country above our country, a tiny country, an irrelevant country over our country. And people are going to look at that and say, wait a second, we thought, in fact, we voted for you because we thought that the two things we could be assured you believed were you were against identity politics. You lectured us about woke for like 10 years. You're against woke because you're against identity politics. You're against tribalism. And here you are not only embracing it, but using it as a cudgel to hit people in the face. And maybe even more shocking, we knew for a fact you were against censorship. I mean, isn't that the whole point of the Trump election? We're against censorship. You can't censor people in a free society. You can't have censorship in a democracy. How will you have the information required to vote? Censorship is totally incompatible with democratic government, period. And it's also, by the way, illegal under the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. And Republicans just won an election on that platform. And all of a sudden we learn there's really nobody in the world more excited about censorship than a neocon podcaster or a National Review staffer. They just love it. People aren't going to forget that. And in a year or 2 or 5 years or whatever, we're going to look back as we do on COVID and the BLM riots and the Me Too movement. And we're going to ask ourselves, how did we fall for another moral panic, another social media-driven moral panic? How did everyone go insane all at once, denouncing each other and denouncing old friends and beclowning themselves because they're caught up in this moment and they can't see that they're betraying the very principles they claimed like 6 months ago they would give their lives for? And those people are going to feel shame, and many of us will feel contempt for them more than we already do. So that's going to happen. They can't win this debate. It's not actually a debate. It's them name-calling. So that's going to happen, rest assured. But in the meantime, the rest of us have to listen to an awful lot of a man who a year ago was unknown to most Americans, kind of a third-tier podcaster, TV host, or radio host, or whatever. A guy who was a weekend show on a cable channel, a guy called Mark Levin. And for the last month, we've been watching Mark Levin say things that no one in my lifetime has ever said from the right, like this. Watch.
I don't know where this Jew hatred from the Marxists, the Islamists, the neo-Nazis, the grifters, I don't know where they're pulling us and pushing us. What do they want to do with American Jews? What do they want to do? Where are they taking this country? They're destroying it. Carlson, Owens, Kelly, Bannon, it is a time for choosing. You pick the good guys or the bad guys. You pit America or you pit the Third Reich. They're not MAGA. They're not conservative. In fact, they're more Marxist, Islamist, America-hating, Jew-hating thugs than anything else. And let me educate them briefly. The Babylonians couldn't kill the Jews. The Persians couldn't kill the Jews. The Romans couldn't kill the Jews. Hitler couldn't kill the Jews, and by this I mean eliminate them. You think your puny little asses are going to be able to do it?
Kill the Jews? Your first thought is, wait a second, how do we get to that? No, just don't want a regime change war against Russia. By the way, a war in which Jews would die, presumably, both in the U.S. military and the IDF. Like, no, don't want to kill anybody. Actually, that's kind of the point. You want to kill the Jews? So the first thing you notice is like the total inversion of what the argument actually is. It's an argument about to what extent should U.S. military power be used on behalf of another country, not the United States. That's it. That's the debate. And all of a sudden it becomes the Babylonians, the Nazis trying to kill the Jews. So again, it's an inversion. he's accusing his opponents of really what he wants, as always. The second thing you notice is how totally personal this is. You're members of the Third Reich. You're Nazis. You're evil. You're an Islamist. You hate Jews. You're an anti-Semite. You hate America. Okay. That's ad hominem. There's no even attempt to address the argument that anyone Mark Levin doesn't agree with is making. Instead, it's just attacking them as people. And the third thing you notice is what animates this, which is hate. Mark Levin is filled with hate, obviously. And hate is one of those words that is thrown around a lot as a weapon. You're filled with hate. That's hate. It's hate speech. Therefore, you can't say it, etc. But that doesn't mean just because the word itself is used cynically that the term doesn't describe anything or that hate isn't real. Hate is absolutely real. Hate is absolutely real. And if you listen to enough Mark Levin, you yourself can become hateful. Reacting against it can turn you into what he claims you are. And that's just a fact of human nature. You stick your face right up against this. After a while, you will become hateful. All of us, even people who are committed to not being that way. It happened to me last week. A week ago tonight. I'm sitting on stage with Megyn Kelly at an event she was doing in New York. And I think Dick Cheney had died that day. And I knew Dick Cheney, obviously, and he had died. And I disagree with Dick Cheney, but I'm not going to criticize a man on the day he dies. I'm just not going to do that because I have reverence for death. But I had a lot of emotion on the topic, and so I said a few nice words about Dick Cheney. He was a great flycaster or whatever, and then I started thinking about his daughter, Liz Cheney, whom I also know and have disliked intensely for quite some time because she slandered me and because I think she is a violence espouser, and I disagree with that, and I have contempt for it. But rather than say that, I just attacked in a vicious way Liz Cheney, and I said something awful about Liz Cheney, actually. Didn't explain why I was mad at Liz Cheney. I just slandered Liz Cheney, basically. And I said that her father would be ashamed of her, and if I had a daughter like that, I'd probably kill myself, which is an awful thing to say. It's kind of hard to believe I said that. But in my mind, I was thinking of all the people I dislike, Liz Cheney would probably be at the top of the list. And so therefore, because I dislike her personally, because I know her personally, and because I so disagree with everything about her political views, I'm the opposite of Liz Cheney. If you were to graph it out, I'd be on one side, Liz Cheney on the other. Because we disagree so profoundly, I told myself, clearly I must have told myself, that you could say anything you want about Liz Cheney. She's not really human. You can say anything you want, including something really awful and nasty, like if I was her dad, I would kill myself. Who thinks like that? Who talks like that? Well, I did. And so I just want to say I'm sorry to Liz Cheney, and I mean that, too. I mean that. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry I said that. I will not stop disagreeing with Liz Cheney until she changes her views. I hope that she does. But there is never an excuse to talk about people like that. And that kind of is the trap here. Mark Levin is almost 70 years old. No one's going to eat the dog food here, okay? That is not a message anyone's going to buy. So the fear is not that Mark Levin will take over American politics. That's not going to happen. The fear is that we become Mark Levin. By staring at Mark Levin too much, we become him. Another way of putting it is, the fight is not against Mark Levin and the many Mark Levins out there, the screamers, the slanderers, the impugners of character, the liars. The real fight is within ourselves. The real fight is against our own nature, our own natural inclination to, in the face of Mark Levin, become Mark Levin. And the cost is to us. You hurt yourself. Don't become evil. Because what's the point? What is the point? And the only way to prevent yourself from becoming that person is by admitting that you've acted like that person and apologizing for it sincerely, not in a fake way. Oh, I'm sorry if you didn't like it. No, I'm sorry, because that's wrong. And it's exactly what I don't like about someone else. And I don't like it about myself when I do it. And I'm going to try not to do it again. And of course I will do it. Probably by the end of the show, I'll do it again because I'm prone to that, because I get mad. But we need to say every single time we do that, no, I'm sorry I did that, and I'll try my best not to do it again. So really, just to keep in mind, as things heat up, don't become the people you despise, or else what's the point? We wind up, the Second World War is that story. We're fighting for freedom, but we're arming Joseph Stalin to do it. Really, we sent more money and airplanes and tanks and jeeps and boots and food to Joseph Stalin, the greatest mass murderer in history, in order to bring what? Freedom to the world? It's not a defense of Hitler, of course, but that's shameful. The Roosevelt administration did that with the full support of his party. It's like, don't become the thing that you hate. That's it. And if you don't do that, if you allow yourself to get carried away, so mad that you start mimicking the hate that's coming at you, what happens? Well, of course, it flowers into violence. Like, that's inevitable. We're very close to that now. In fact, we're there in some ways. It's happened. We're still talking about a political assassination, a friend's political assassination on September 10th. Charlie Kirk was murdered because of this. So it can happen, and it will happen unless all of us prevent ourselves from becoming that. And by the way, you can't control other people. All you can do is control your own behavior. So if you act like that, apologize for it. I'm going to really try and do that. But we are absolutely moving toward violence, and it should be really clear. That's the other thing, is you don't want to espouse violence, because where does it go? It always begets more violence 100% of the time. September 11th led to millions of deaths in the Middle East. Yeah. October 7th led to Gaza. Like this, once the violence begins, you can't predict its course, but you can be fairly certain it will accelerate. And when that happens, all calculations change and people change. And the feud becomes irresolvable and more people die. And that could happen in our country. So the only way to stop it is by controlling your own behavior so you yourself don't become evil. So Mark Levin is already there. And we know that because Mark Levin has repeatedly, and he's not the only one, but he's the most blunt, has repeatedly called for just murdering civilians, children in Gaza, because they're Amalek or whatever. They're stained by blood guilt. Prime Minister of Israel said exactly the same thing. They are guilty by virtue of how they were born. So that, by definition, includes women and children. So Mark Levin is not clever enough to keep the implications of these views to himself, and he said them repeatedly on television, just to give you a sense about how Mark Levin feels about human life and the human soul. Watch this.
And I'm supposed to, what? Shed crocodile tears for what's going to happen to these people? I'm not. Maybe I'm the only one who will voice it, but I'm not. Israel has every right to throw every damn thing it has at barbarians. And if there are innocent people, quote-unquote civilians, who are killed, then maybe they ought to organize to take out the government they elected. Tapper and the others are saying there's 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. They're not all terrorists. They don't all believe in Hamas. They really have no choice. Let me ask you a question. Is that how we treated the German people when we were fighting the Third Reich? Well, they're not all Nazis. I mean, you got to fight to win and survive. You can't sit there and figure all that stuff out. Oh, but don't hurt the civilians. Look, we have to defend ourselves. The Israelis have to defend ourselves. The free world has to defend itself. And if there's collateral damage, well, that's too bad.
25 years ago in this country, people didn't talk that way. They didn't. It was a different landscape, different expectations. The idea of blood guilt, because that's what he's describing there. You should be killed by virtue of who your parents are, who your grandparents were, by virtue of how you were born. You should be killed. You don't have a right to live. You're guilty because you were born, and which, of course, leads to collective punishment and genocide. That's the basis of genocide right there, that attitude. That was considered totally un-Christian and un-American because it is. And if someone said something like that on television, I mean, he'd be probably pulled off the air for that. You should kill kids because you don't like their parents? That is their attitude. That's the Israeli government's attitude. Well-documented attitude. We're paying for that. And you could say, well, you don't have to hate Israel, but that behavior is not better than Hamas at all. In fact, it's kind of the same, right? You killed civilians. They came in and killed people at a music festival. Bibi, turns out, let them in. We found out today in the Knesset. But whatever you think of what happened on October 7th, Israeli civilians were killed. That's terrible. We're against that. We have to be against that, and we're no better than the people we're fighting, of course. What is the difference between us and them? We're in different groups? That's not a meaningful difference. The difference is we're committed to a set of Western principles, and those principles begin with we reject blood guilt. And because we do, we reject collective punishment and genocide. A lot of us thought that was a consensus after World War II. That was the lesson of the Nazi regime. Should have been the lesson of the Soviet regime, which, of course, practiced collective punishment and committed genocide against Christians. Most people don't even know that. It did more efficiently than the Nazis did. But all of it is terrible. All of it is awful. And a lot of us thought that was the main lesson that we were supposed to take away from the war. And by the way, that's a great lesson. That's an excellent lesson. We should take that lesson from the Second World War. And then you wake up and there's Mark Levin, and not just Mark Levin, but our policymakers, our members of Congress. Most of whom are not Jewish, by the way. This infected everybody. That's okay. It's not okay. It'll never be okay. It's a shame. It's shameful behavior. It's a stain on this country. You can't fight people unless you think you're morally superior to them. You shouldn't be. And how can you say you're morally superior if you're operating from the same assumption, which is that everyone on the other side should be killed because of how they were born? But that is absolutely Mark Levin's assumption. And he said it out loud. Look at this Twitter exchange. Watch this. She's basically saying, I don't understand why we're getting involved in all this stuff. And Mark Levin is saying, well, you're a Nazi. And someone writes in and says, Mark, I'm not even, I may be on your side or not, but what you're saying is actually creating anti-Semitism. And he's saying, and I'm quoting, anti-Semitism is, quote, in your family's DNA. Who thinks that? Who would say something like that? Guilt or virtue are not in your DNA. We don't believe in a chosen people, and we don't believe in a damned people. Period. We don't believe that in the West. We don't believe that some peoples are inherently better or worse than other peoples. We believe in individuals in the capacity of every person to make individual choices and change for the better or the worse. And on that basis, they are judged, but not on how they were born. And if we don't believe that, if we think that some people are just inherently bad because of their DNA, as Mark has said, and a lot of other people like Mark have said, then what's the point of what's the point of all of this? At that point, it's just well, my group has more guns than your group and we're in charge. That attitude gets people killed and it rots your soul. That's why we say anti-Semitism is bad in the first place, isn't it? You can't judge a whole group of people by how they were born, by their genetics, by their DNA. But there's Mark Levin doing it. So it shouldn't surprise you that, of course, if you have those attitudes and you think there are Americans, and he clearly does, whose DNA makes them less than human, unsalvageable, inherently evil, well, it shouldn't surprise you that he'd be calling for violence against them, and he is. And this isn't your kind of classic, oh, everyone's out to kill me, I'm so important. I despise that. But it's a fact, and we know that from what he says. So here's Mark Levin about 2 weeks, in fact, I think exactly 2 weeks after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and he was trying to explain how this happened. How did Charlie get killed? Here's what he said.
The call to violence, that's what it is. You're calling people Hitler. It's a mass murder. You're treating ICE like it's the Gestapo or the SS. Then you're free to shoot them.
There you go. You call people Hitler, they get killed, right? You torque up the rhetoric to, we've all decided Hitler is the worst. Okay, great. Hitler's bad, for sure. So once you call people that, you liken them to the person we collectively agree is the worst person ever, person we collectively agree if you had a chance to kill baby Hitler, you would, then why wouldn't you kill the people who are Hitler in your own society? Well, you probably would, and you'd feel justified in doing it. And that was the point he was making. Yeah, fair point. You hope it's not used to censor people. You're allowed to have ugly thoughts. By the way, they're constitutionally protected. But you should be discouraged from it, for sure. And as Mark Levin just said, they lead to violence. Calling people Hitler leads to violence. Wow. Well, since that's his description in his terms. Consider this clip about a month later.
I would ask some of these people who say, look, I'm going to stand by Tucker. You know, he's just inquisitive. He likes to have these people on and ask them questions. Really? But I'm not going to platform them, no. So Tucker is a racist. Is that okay? First of all, how many of you have friends who are racists? Isn't that a fair question, Mr. Producer? How many of you have friends who are racists and are proud of it and talk about it on a national platform? This is what I get now. Will you debate him? Will you debate Tucker Carlson? I don't debate the Klan. I don't debate Nazis.
I don't debate Nazis. He texted me that. Almost didn't want to address this because you never want to make anything about yourself. It's another way in which you can very easily become Mark Levin, start talking about yourself all the time. Your family, your people. No. If you're interested in improving the country, you should be talking about all people in the country. It's not just about you or your people, whoever they are. It should be about everybody. That's the universalist spirit without which this country can't continue, just to be clear. It'll break apart, of course, into warring groups. But the basis of racism and anti-Semitism and all forms of bias that we abhor, forms of bias that treat people as members of groups rather than individuals, all emanate from the same idea, which is you're born a certain way and you can't be fixed. You have blood guilt. And that's why it's bad to call people Nazis. And here is Mark Levin calling people Nazis. Well, in this case, me. So what is that? Well, that's, of course, a call to violence. And it's not just me. We compiled a list of all of some of the people on Twitter Mark Levin has referred to. These are all recent. Nazi, Nazi, Nazi bastard. F off, Nazi, 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 Nazi. But finally, somebody writes in on Twitter and says, and we're quoting, this is Mark Levin's 12th post today that's related to Israel or its critics. I know he's Jewish and sympathy for Israel is understandable, but this now borders on obsession, to which Mark Levin responds, Nazi! Nazi! You should pause before you call people names like that. And I should just say, because righteousness is a goal, self-righteousness is a sin, I don't want to be self-righteous. I've certainly called people things they didn't deserve. I've leveled ad hominem attacks on people. I did against Liz Cheney. I apologize for it. I meant it. But we shouldn't let ourselves go in this area. We should force ourselves to treat other people like human beings with sincere disagreements or insincere disagreements, but still agreements that we can debate. Because once you start calling people Nazis, we really have no choice but to start shooting them. To be Dietrich Bonhoeffer and sort of reach the end of reason or even Christianity. Bonhoeffer decided Christianity's not even, he was a Lutheran pastor. Christianity's not enough. We have to kill the guy. I'm not judging Bonhoeffer, who was a great man in some ways, but that's inevitable once we decide that people are Nazis. So you kind of have to wonder why they're doing this. And of course, it's because when you call someone a Nazi, and maybe in Mark Levin's case, he believes it, you immediately freeze them in the headlights of your slur. Nazi, Nazi. You deter people from arguing with you because no one wants to be called a Nazi. But you also, for the bystanders who aren't even directly part of the debate, you draw their attention away from what the debate is actually about. In other words, for every moment that we're arguing about who is and who is not a Nazi, answer really nobody. The Nazis have been gone for 80 years, sorry. But for every moment where they're having that debate, we're not debating the things we ought to be debating. In this case, should we use military force on behalf of a small country, a totally irrelevant country? That's a fair debate. We're not having that debate. We're screaming about who is a Nazi, who's not a Nazi. So I guess the thing that we can learn from Mark Levin in this case is if you have a position, argue that position. Levin doesn't want to argue his position. It's very hard to defend, so he won't defend it. He'll just attack. But the rest of us who have a sincere position about America's relationship with Israel and the damage it has done to the Trump coalition, which we're watching it be destroyed, very unfortunately, those people should argue what they believe and not get caught in this trap of identity politics. Who's a Nazi who has a right to speak? Buzz off. No. AIPAC is a foreign lobby. It should register as one. Our country should come first in the thinking of every person who represents our country. Those are the debates that we ought to be having. So the next lesson that we should learn from this contretemps is that you can't allow other people to define your priorities. You are an adult. You are an American. You have the right to decide what matters to you. If you're having trouble paying your health insurance, or if you think divorce laws are unfair in this country, or if you think chemtrails are a problem, if you don't like fluoride in the water, if you think there should be a cap on credit card interest, whatever the issue that matters to you, first and foremost, you have a right to feel that way. No one should be allowed to talk you into adopting their enemies as your own. There are a ton of people in Washington who think the single most dangerous person in the world, most evil person who's ever lived is Vladimir Putin. Some of them really think that. A lot of them are just getting rich by saying it, but a lot of them do believe it because I know them. I know they feel that way. It's sincere. But as a percentage of the country, what percentage of the country actually puts killing Putin at the top of its priority list? Like less than 1%. It's just not a problem for most Americans. Who runs Russia? But it's a huge problem in Washington. So Washington, for a couple of years there, succeeded in convincing the rest of us to either adopt their priority, Putin is the most important thing, we have to stop Putin, or shut up about it because if you don't, you're an agent of Putin. Basically bullied the country into accepting their list of priorities. And the election of Trump was really a refutation of that. It was tens of millions of voters saying, no, actually, our problems need a hearing. Someone needs to care about our problems. It's not just about you and your little parochial squabble. They're telling us now that Iran is the biggest problem we've ever had. And if you question that, like how many Americans have been killed on American soil by Iran as compared to the number, I don't know, killed by Mexico, which brings all our fentanyl in, not Venezuela, Mexico, you get attacked as an agent of the mullahs. And the way to think about this is, who cares? Your priorities are every bit as important as Mark Levin's because you are a co-equal with Mark Levin because you're also an American citizen. He gets one vote, you get one vote. That's our system. So Mark Levin can scream at you all he wants and tell you must really care about affecting regime change in Iran. It is absolutely okay. In fact, it's your duty to say to Mark Levin, I don't really care. I can't afford my health insurance. Our leaders should solve that problem. And you'll be joined in that by like 150 million other Americans who agree with you, who can't find Iran on a map. They're not pro-Iran. They're not Shiite Muslims. But they have real problems and they want a hearing for those problems. They want someone else to care about those problems. That's okay. And it's interesting because people like Levin and Ben Shapiro, who at one point had this like media empire propped up by Facebook, the Daily Wire, with some good people on it. You know, it's fine. It's fine. But Ben Shapiro spent, I don't know, a decade posing as someone who actually cared about your concerns as an American. He did it imperfectly. There were flashes that he didn't really care. But he's like, no, I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative. I'm not just interested in the fortunes of one tiny country in the Middle East with a population of 9 million. No, I have a lot of interests. I really care about this country, and I'm against the trans movement or whatever. But increasingly, as everyone's gotten more hysterical and prone to sort of blurting out the truth, that veil has dropped, and you can see what Ben Shapiro really, really cares about. So this is a very revealing exchange that took place 6 days ago, last Thursday, on stage with Megyn Kelly. Ben Shapiro was just sitting there being interviewed by Megyn Kelly and he said something like, well, Tucker Carlson's, for Maduro, the communist leader of Venezuela, who I guess were on the way to killing or something, forcing out, regime changing him. And he defended Maduro. Didn't, actually. And Megyn Kelly says, well, Tucker said in his show that Maduro, most people didn't know this, whatever his many faults, I wouldn't hire him as an economist, okay? But whatever his many faults, has the most socially conservative country probably in the hemisphere. So Venezuela is just a fact. I mean, I didn't make this up. I'm not in charge of Venezuela. Just noticing that Venezuela has banned pornography, banned abortion, banned gay marriage, banned sex changes, and banned usury. You don't have credit cards with 40% interest in Venezuela. Okay. Ben Shapiro responded this way.
Tucker's made the point, I'm not going to here to be Tucker's defender, but he's made the point that Maduro is culturally conservative.
Who gives a shit? The guy's a communist dictator. Everyone in his country is eating dog. He's shipping fentanyl to the United States to kill Americans. Why do I give a shit whether he's anti-LGBTQ rights?
Who gives a shit? I do. I'm not moving to Venezuela. I'm not pro-Maduro. But I care about that. Why wouldn't I care about that? I've got kids. Like, first of all, I'm against abortion. Sorry, unpopular. I feel that way. I think it's really sad. I would personally become poorer to end abortion, voluntarily become poorer to end abortion in the United States. That's not a choice. Don't want to become poorer, but I would because I care about it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're offended that I do, but I care about it. Lots of people care about it. I don't think pornography is good. That really hurts people. You know, I don't think pretending that the sexes are the same is good. And you claimed that you didn't think it was good, but it turns out, quote, I don't give a shit. Maduro's against Israel. Oh, okay. I don't give a shit. Well, you spent like a decade pretending you did give a shit, that you were on the side of like normal Americans who have a mix of concerns. They definitely care about economics and they care about social issues too because they have children and they see where this is going. It's not good. That your economic condition is not the only measure of health. Your spiritual condition matters too. It's just a fact. It does. If you're totally degraded, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It's not worth it. It's not worth getting the whole world and losing your soul. Sorry. And most people feel the way, but not Ben Shapiro. He doesn't give a shit. So why the hostility? Well, maybe because if you keep talking about the so-called social issues, which are not limited to abortion and pornography and gay marriage, the trans issue, they get pretty quickly to economics, to usury, to lending money and interest. And most people, including me, are not against lending money and interest, conceptually. But it depends on what interest rate it's being loaned at. So there are payday loans in this country that are 600% annually. 600% interest annually? And who's taking payday loans in this? Well, poor people are. And they're never getting out of it. They're car loans. They're credit card loans. There's private credit. We used to call it loan sharking. At exorbitant rates. Rates so high that people will never get out from under them. They're enslaved by it. It's called debt slavery. It's 100% real. That's not an ideological point. It's just an obvious observation. And it was one of the observations that Charlie Kirk was making on a daily basis before he was assassinated, which is interesting. And it's that kids are buying food on credit. Buy now, pay later. That's credit. You're paying interest on that, whether they call it that or not. Late fees. People are loaning you money at a much higher interest rate than, say, rich people are borrowing money. And that's bad because it's really hard to get out of it. And if you're wondering why the average American homebuyer, American-born homebuyer, is almost 40 years old, when the year I graduated from college, it was 28. How did that happen? People are in too much debt. This is probably, if it isolated in a world with a lot of issues, a lot of pressing issues, debt for young people is probably the number one issue, which is to say it's the number one thing that is destroying them and making it impossible for them to get married and have children, which Ben Shapiro told us he cared about. And that's the conversation that they absolutely don't want to have. So if you say, well, Maduro, whatever his many faults, probably stole the election. Looks that way to me. I don't know, but it looks that way. People say he's bad. I'm okay. I believe you. He's bad. But he doesn't have that. And that's a good thing. And Ben Shapiro's like, I don't give a shit. Shut up. He's a communist. It makes you wonder how we're defining communist here. Because, of course, in the United States, communist no longer means someone who believes Marx and Engels. It has nothing to do with academic theory. That's all gone. Communist in the United States is a synonym for someone who seeks to rot a society from within and destroy it. And I guess I would argue that if you don't give a shit about pornography or 63 million abortions in the United States since Roe v. Wade or whatever, and if you don't care about 600% annual interest rates on payday loans being given to the poor, who's the communist exactly? Who's trying to rot this country from the inside? Who doesn't care about the destruction of human beings in our country. It's not me. You're a communist. So I thought a lot about this. I didn't want, you never want to extrapolate too much from a single clip. You don't want to be cruel to people. You don't want to be unfair. Having been unfair many times, it weighs on me. Don't want to do that. So kind of looked around. Is this consistent with Ben Shapiro's worldview? Does he think GDP, the aggregate economic activity in a country, the bottom line number, which really doesn't tell you that much, but for simple people like Ben, who aren't sophisticated in their understanding of economics, that's important. GDP, GDP, GDP. Never hinting at the things that it doesn't measure, never hinting at what a distorted number that is, just like the inflation rate or the employment rate. I mean, these are not really real numbers. But is he really a guy who cares about GDP or economic activity or some people getting rich more than he cares about the lives of his fellow Americans? Boy, that's a pretty heavy charge. You'd hate to level that against anyone. You'd hate to claim that about anyone. Could this be a guy who really only cares about a foreign country? So we went looking. So first, and famously, don't even put it on the screen because I'm sure you've seen this, there was Ben Shapiro saying, I'd be willing to vote for Bibi Netanyahu for president of the United States if only it were constitutionally allowed. Huh? You want some foreigner to run our country? Who even thinks like that? He said that. Maybe it was just he was getting carried away. He just loves Bibi so much. Loves the guy who is killing tens of thousands of children in Gaza so much that he wants him to run our country. Okay. But then we found a couple of other clips, which are recent, that give a window, not just, and I hate to be mean to poor Ben Shapiro, who's clearly going away as a media force. I hate to be mean to him. But this does reflect the worldview of an awful lot of people in Washington and a lot of people in Ben Shapiro's world. And that worldview is the people of this country don't really matter. They can be replaced. And by the way, if you complain about the fact they're being replaced, which they are at high speed, it's measurable, then you're a Nazi and you must shut up and be punished. But those people don't really matter. They should do what they're told. And ultimately, they should just serve the people who are profiting from all of this. Does he really think that? Well, here are a couple of clips that you can watch carefully and answer the question for yourself. Here's Ben Shapiro.
We have trained an entire generation of people to believe that if their lives are not what they want them to be, it's the fault of systems, as opposed to decisions that are in their own control. And politicians absolutely have a stake in selling that. A lot of people in our industry have a stake in selling that. It makes people feel good about themselves and bad about the world. And the reality is, if you want a better life, you should feel better about the world and worse about yourself. If you're a young person and you can't afford to live here, then maybe you should not live here. I mean, that is a real thing. Yeah, I know that we've now grown up in a society that says that you deserve to live where you grew up. But the reality is that the history of America is almost literally the opposite of that.
It's hard to know where to start with that clip. I think that's been on the internet and people are experiencing gut-level revulsion when they see it, and they really should. And there's so many ways to approach that. There's so many things wrong with those statements. So childish, those statements, so lacking an understanding of people or any connection really to the country at all. But really what you see underneath all of that is contempt for the people who live here. You have no right to live in the town where you were born just because your parents are buried there. Your ancestors built the town. Who do you think you are? Imagine feeling that way about someone in your own country. Imagine having that level of contempt for a fellow American. You don't even know anything about the person. It's young people. They're not entitled to live where they want. They'll live where BlackRock tells them they can live. It's like, whoa. If you had a thought like that, I've had some ugly thoughts. I just admitted having some ugly thoughts. Boy, I would try and push it back and not express it. Ben says it without any embarrassment because he means it. That's exactly right, because he means it. Whew. I don't think that you can win a popular debate with that attitude, because irrespective of the content of your sentence, people can feel the loathing that the speaker has for them. Ben Shapiro just does not care about you at all, is not even pretending to care about you. So again, it really doesn't matter what he's selling. That guy is not going to make the sale if people are free to buy whatever they want. It's like, I don't know what that guy's selling, but he doesn't like me. I can feel it right away. He doesn't care at all about me at all. And he thinks so little of me, he's not even going to like put on the dog. He's not even going to like try to pretend to care about me. And a guy like that, whew, he really needs censorship and bullying to succeed, because the free market does not reward a man like that at all, ever, because people don't like it. Why would they like it? Here's another clip that makes basically the same point that is in some ways even more disgusting, maybe less well known. Here's Ben Shapiro telling you that if you ever want to retire, stop working to pay off your 50 freaking year mortgage. You own the house, really, for 50 years. Okay, no, I'm renting it. I'll be 90 by the time I pay it off, which of course I won't, because I got all kinds of other loans too. So if you complain about that, if you had these dreams of like working really hard and retiring, how dare you? How dare you? Here's Ben Shapiro.
No one in the United States should be retiring at 65 years old. Frankly, I think retirement itself is a stupid idea unless you have some sort of health problem. It's totally insane that you believe that you should be able to work from the time that you are essentially 20 to the time that you are 65, which is a 45-year period, pay in, and then you will receive Social Security benefits sufficient to support you and your family, you and your wife or whatever, for like another 20 years. That's crazy talk.
Yeah, it's crazy talk. Like, how dare you? How dare you? Now, the conventional response to this, and I've heard people say it, is, well, Ben Shapiro can say that because he's a podcaster. He's not climbing ladders for a living. And if you climb ladders for a living, you know, or do any kind of physical labor, even light physical labor, your body breaks down. It's just a fact. And if you are around people who've done it, you know, by the time they get to 50, they're limping and they're in pain. That's why they're, you know, you go to these little towns around the country and most businesses are gone. There are no furniture stores or no toy stores. Like, they're all gone. They're all at Walmart. They're a husk. But what you do find next to the, the drug rehab places are chiropractors, or a lot of chiropractors throughout the country. It's because poorer people, working class people, blue collar people are aching. They have trouble walking. Their backs hurt. So retirement for a man who climbs ladders is a little bit different from a man who hosts a podcast. But that's not even the point that I would make. That's true, of course. He's pure contempt for people who work with their bodies, and he should be judged for that. But I think it's deeper than that. It's like, how dare you tell me when I should retire? Who are you exactly? Who gave you the moral authority to judge when I retire? That's insane! You're like a child who's got some deal with Facebook or whatever, whoever you are. You are not God. You have no right to talk to me like that. But you do because you have no respect for me. You have no love for me at all. And it does kind of point to the core problem, not with Ben Shapiro, who will not be a factor in America in 5 years. I can promise you that. Or Mark Levin. Let's hope he gets better. No, it points to the problem with their leaders. They don't like the people they lead. That's it right there. They have no love for the people they lead. And all leadership is based on the patriarchal model. The father is a good father because he loves his children. He may make mistakes, but ultimately he comes back to true north because he loves them. That's what keeps him honest, his sincere love for his children. That is the model for all leadership. That's the model for leadership in the military, in a company. That's the model for rhetorical leadership. You want people to follow you? You want to sell your ideas to them? You want to convince them that what you're saying is true? Show some love for them. Demonstrate that you love them. You care about them. Why are we doing this? Because we think it's better for you. Shapiro and all of these guys, they don't make an effort to do that because they don't feel that way at all. Shut up, cattle. You're a Nazi. Give us the money for our preferred little country, or else we're going to denounce you. Man, those attitudes are incompatible with leadership and, in fact, with democracy itself. You can't have a country of 350 million people governed by boutique goals and concerns. I really care so much about this thing, and you better care about it too, or else I'm going to attack you and deplatform you. It doesn't work. It's illegitimate, actually. And if you keep it up, you're flirting with, real backlash, like a real one. not Nick Fuentes, like a real one. So cool it. Listen to other people. Don't treat them like cattle. Treat them like human beings. And finally, the last lesson to learn from all of this is that there is no Amalek. Deuteronomy describes a tribe that is beyond redemption and must be killed. Period. Because they have blood guilt. Their DNA, as Mark Levin explained on Twitter, makes them evil. And they must be destroyed, every one of them. Not just the fighting age men, but their wives and their kids and their parents. All must be killed because we're not just killing a foreign army, we're killing a strain of genetics. Because that's where the sin comes from, their genetics. We do not acknowledge that. We cannot allow that attitude. That will wind up like Rwanda right away, like quickly in our lifetimes. We will see mass killing if we don't get that attitude under control. It's the attitude that animated the Nazis. It's the attitude that really is behind all mass slaughter in history, and we can't have it in the West, period. So once you accept that, then you also have to acknowledge that there are no permanent enemies, that we disagree with people. We may violently disagree, passionately disagree. I hate what you're saying. But we all, and this is a Christian imperative as well, but also it's like a prerequisite for continuing to exist. You have to acknowledge and say out loud that if people change, or if you change, because we all do change, and when we're under pressure, we change much more quickly. All of us are changing right now. It's imperceptible to us usually. But keep a daily diary and look at it 5 years from now. You're a different person. You change. And so do all the people around you. And because that is true, some people will change for the worse. Some people will change for the better. We cannot have permanent enemies. Period. It's immoral to imagine that someone must always be your enemy. That he's an Amalekite or whatever. That is immoral. And it's also, by the way, cutting yourself off from one of life's greatest joys, which is finding common humanity with another person and deciding, wait a second, I really dislike this person, but all of a sudden I'm seeing this person as a person whose concerns are not exactly the same as mine, but close enough. And actually this person is saying something really interesting, and I'm learning and I'm changing and I'm becoming much more aware of who this person is, and I really like it. In other words, there's no greater joy than the joy of reconciliation. That's the story of the prodigal son. Yeah, he did all kinds of indefensible stuff. Yeah, he wasted dad's money. Yeah, he acted like a total asshole. Okay, but he's back, and we're going to celebrate it. That's the greatest, most profound joy that there is, being reunited to another person, discovering that actually, I really like you. I thought I didn't, but now I do, because there are no permanent enemies.
In a world of codes, screens, and lights, hidden truths were digital masks. City of the binary nights, awake from the programmed tasks. Eyes open wide to the glitch in the seams. Planets grab the mirror cage. Truth isn't what it seems. Find yourself beyond the digital rage. Break the matrix, break the mold. Riddles in the coding unfold.